Hello and welcome. You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? This podcast is for you who cares deeply and seeks to catalyze the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a consciousness catalyst and soul coach to superstar change agents in business, leadership, and life. In this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including earthkeeper, healer, mindset coach, lawyer, business, sustainability, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, and soul mastery so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. The whole idea of Catalyst Talks in these conversations is to awaken consciousness, unlock higher purpose, and learn what it really takes to catalyze change in that scale. Subscribe to our new podcast and help us grow. We're aiming to reach 1 million people at least in 2020. Let's wake up the world together. My guest today on Catalyst Talks podcast is Steve Little. He's known as the Activator. He catalyzes billions of dollars into impact. He's an acclaimed serial entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, mergers and acquisitions expert. He's known for generating accelerated value growth and extraordinarily high acquisition value multiples for his companies and his clients. He sold his first company at the age of 15 and has never looked back. He has founded and scaled 6 successful startups of his own to private 9-figure acquisitions, and he does this for his clients as well. Everything he does is tied to a positive impact on this planet. Steve is the founder and managing director of Zero Limits Ventures. He is a consciousness catalyst, and this conversation we have is baked with nuggets. My intention is for you listen to the whole thing because it's packed, and to find exactly what you need for something that needs catalyzing and activating in your life right now. So Steve, you are the Activator. I'd love to hear where and when that title first landed for you.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was coming. So, well, thanks. That's a great question. That one, actually, I built 6 very successful software companies and, had moved out to the Bay Area and had established relationships with a number of what I think were top tier venture firms out there. And they had me going in to try to figure out how to get their companies in the portfolio position for a high return exit, since that's what I specialize in. And along the way, I met an individual by the name of Feinberg. He hates it when I do this, but I sort of refer to him as a corporate shrink. But, he's one of these guys that comes in and works with the executive team to help them become better at what they need to get done. Sort of takes, a group of 180 IQs individually that work together as about a 50, and he brings the group IQ up to, genius level. So, and in the process of doing that, of course, he gets to know you quite well. And he acknowledged or recognized that, what he saw me doing as I would integrate myself into these executive teams so that I could influence the direction of the company and generate the outcome the investors wanted, was that I was very talented at activating the roles and the objectives and the intentions of each of these other departments and each of these other executives. So he coined the name The Activator, and it stuck. So I'm the Activator.
Yeah, and activist capitalist, was that part of the? Well, let's just back up. So I'm diving right in, and there's so much juice here on the surface. But let's just start with this. Where are you today? Where are you speaking from?
I'm in Bethesda, Maryland, in my COVID-bound office.
And where were you when you were 15?
I was in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, on the main line there, is sort of the King of Prussia area. It was a great childhood.
Yeah, and I'm painting this picture because you're somebody who started in the business world when you were very young. So you sold your first company at 15. I want to know who you are. I want to know what mindset you have or had at that age that you said, "Hey, I can do this. I'm going to do this." And what was this that you did?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's quite a story actually, because it did actually set up life legacy that is now. I'm 61. I started when I was 13, And there's a common thread that runs throughout, and I think that's really the most relevant thing for today. When I was 13, I was like any other 13-year-old. On Saturday mornings, my biggest objective was to figure out how to go play the baseball, right? I was hanging around the house and got under my dad's foot, and he said, "Hey, why don't you go do something? Go cut the grass." And I'd actually never cut the grass before, but I gave it a whirl, and I literally walked back and forth 3 times and said, "This is definitely not for me." The bugs and the heat and this is not my thing. I saw my neighbor's kid sitting over in his yard, and I'd offered to pay him to do the cutting, and sort of did an arbitrage on what I was getting paid. And it worked pretty good. So I started replicating that and started going from neighbor to neighbor and selling the lawn care service. And, kept little Scotty pretty busy for a while. And I hired another kid. And then I had the idea to go down the corner and pick up some laborers that were out there all the time and hire them. And, eventually built a pretty good sized business, cutting the yards. And, that's how I got started. And then when I was 15, my dad came home and said, "Hey, we're moving." And I said, "Hey, well, what am I going to do with my business?" And I understand my dad thought I was just like cutting some neighbors' yards. He didn't realize I was running a business with 35 employees and, 2 warehouses full of equipment, right? So
how did he miss that?
Well, he's a busy guy. I mean, that's the way it was in those days. Teenagers were sort of left on their own to fend for themselves. Parents went out and worked hard, and that was my upbringing, and so I sort of found my way and had built a business and was making pretty good money. I mean, we did the calculation the other day. I built that to produce about $8,000 a month to me in 1973 money. And the best estimate I've got is that's about $50,000 a month in today's money. So it was a pretty good business. One of the things that I had done along the way is, for weeks and weeks and weeks in the summer months in Pennsylvania, the grass doesn't grow that fast. So, I had all these regular jobs, and every Saturday I'd go by and say, "Hey, Miss Smith, we're going to cut the grass today." And she'd say, "Yeah." And we'd, come do it. But, I started to hear people say, "Well, it's not growing that fast. Come back next week." So skip a week, right? And, that happened about 5 times in one day. And I thought, gee whiz, this is going to cost me some money. This is no good, right? So I came with the idea of creating quarterly, semi-annual, annual service contracts where they would sign up for a number of visits or a number of services, and I would bill them periodically. And that way the business became much more predictable, and it allowed us to expand our services a little bit. We cut the grass in the summer, we raked the leaves in the fall, we shoveled the snow in the winter. After a storm in the spring, we picked up the twigs and leaves and stuff. And just, our job was to keep the place looking kept. We weren't going to do any heavy landscaping or heavy lifting, but, we were just going to keep it looking nice. And people loved that. Well, so when my dad told me about moving, and I said, "Well, what am I going to do with my business?" And he said, "Well, I'm sure they'll understand that you can't cut the grass anymore." I went up to my room and got my book. I had a loose leaf notebook I'd written in hand and magic marker on the cover, Steve's Big Book of Business. And I plopped that book down in front of him at the kitchen table, and he started leafing through it, got about halfway through and realized, holy cow, this guy's cutting 135 yards a week. This is a big business, and he asked to see my checkbook, which of course I brought to him. And he said, this is amazing. This is a tremendous business here. I don't know what to tell you. I'm an engineer. I don't know what to do with something like this. All these people are going to be upset. So I said, well, maybe we can sell it. I had him take me into town, and right around then, companies like Lawn Doctor and so forth were just moving into the area. And long story short, I did a deal with one of them to buy those contracts and buy the business in the process. And I sold that business for about $247,1973.
And what did you do with the money? What was your first?
My dad took the check and put it in my college fund.
Okay.
I never saw it, so I assume he used it for my college. It was all good by me. I mean, it was fun. I had a good time. And here's the thing, and this is really the important thing about this, is that I learned something very important that I could not have articulated when I was 15.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that there are specific things that drive the value of a business, and that knowing what they are and understanding what the potential buyer's motives are for selling a business becomes a critical aspect of what you should invest your time and money in. So, for instance, in this simple case, it wasn't the equipment, it certainly wasn't my employees, it wasn't me that was valuable. It was those contracts that was valuable, because that long service care company understood that I'd already knocked on all the doors. I'd already gotten all the customers. I'd done the hard part. He was going to buy 135 active customers that expected service every week for a fair value, and he could upsell them on virtually any other service that he had, fertilizers, bug treatments, whatever. So he saw it as a very valuable acquisition because of those contracts, right? And that's what I learned, is that the value driver in that business was those contracts. Well, that's the lesson I carried forward with me. But then as I grew and matured as a businessman, once I got into building software companies, I started to recognize that there were even deeper hidden value drivers that were much more significant in terms of building a great legacy for a good, long-lasting company, something that far outlasts my involvement. And I sort of made a study of this, and long story short is I've come up with 18 value drivers that are fairly traditional and 6 value accelerators that are less traditional. And the important one here is that the number one value driver is having an impact mission. And the reason is quite simple. There's a risk-value equation in terms of the value of a business. And I'm skipping over lots of finance stuff here, as you know, but I'm just skipping to the end because it's the important part.
Mm-hmm.
That risk-value equation basically says the higher the risk of ownership of your business, the lower the value of the business. Now, that applies to whether you're raising money or whether you're selling your business. It's all the same, right? So anything that you do that reduces the risk of ownership will, by definition, increase the value, or at least the potential value of the business. So you look at all the things you can do. There are things like get more predictability in your operations, more reliability in your customer service, more predictability in your revenue, and so on and so forth. So all those things are factors. But there's also these other less tangible factors, like, how do you create an environment? How do you activate the people in an organization around a cause or around a mission that becomes a central theme, a central bit of the DNA of a company? And that turns out to be the thing that drives the most value of all. And it's quite simple. It becomes the reason customers buy from you. It becomes the reason employees work for you. It becomes the reason investors invest in you. It becomes not just a bolt-on bit of charitable giving, but I mean something that becomes core to the value system and the culture of the company. Now, it can be any kind of mission, whether it's cleaning plastics out of the ocean or housing the homeless or feeding the starving or giving water to people who can't get water, whatever it is, right? There's many, many, many things that we can focus on. What's really important, though, is that it be part of who the company is. It be a visible component of the brand identity. And that by doing that, you fundamentally increase the value of the business by minimizing risk of ownership and risk of capital. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. You know what? I have this question around when the value is core to the people and the system of the company. There's two ways this could play out. One is that the company does one thing, and then you have this other impact mission or cause that is like central to, it's important and it's maybe embedded in the culture, but it might not actually be the product or be what the business is about, right? And then you have another company that actually is leveraging a marketplace around cleaning ocean out of the plastic.
Yeah, right. A company that builds a machine that cleans plastics, right? That would be a direct impact mission. An indirect impact mission would be a company that finances the company that builds that machine.
Okay. Yep.
So, right. Here's an example.
I said cleans the ocean out of the plastic is what I just said. But yes.
Yeah. Well, I hope it doesn't get to that, right?
I know. I was just thinking about that little foreshadowing there. Yeah. So go deeper into that for you. Where did this first come up? Like when you were 15, you figured out a pretty important,
Yeah.
business.
Well, I was at 15. I wasn't sophisticated enough to get the impact mission bit, right? But I did get that there were non-financial value drivers. There were things that were really more important than revenue and earnings. And that's played out quite obviously in the market. If it were just revenue and earnings that drives value, then clearly you couldn't explain things like Snapchat or other things that we've all seen plenty of, where there's limited, if any, revenue and limited, if any, earnings, but the companies are extraordinarily valuable in terms of market cap. And that's because it's actually not revenue and earnings that drives value. So that was the lesson. Now, what happened over time is I began to see that there were lots of ways to implement strategies to increase value. And when the marketplace, or when awareness, I'll use the consciousness tipping point, we're sort of arriving at this tipping point where there's more and more people out there running businesses, large and small, that really deeply feel the urgency around improving conditions for humanity, whether you're a climate change person or not, whether it's financial, whether it's, economic or environmental or social or cultural, whatever. There's so many things. Mm-hmm. And people are deeply motivated to do these things. And as an activator, I want to help people actually reach that motivation and implement something, right? So that's really how this whole activist capitalist thing came to be, is that I started up through the value growth chain, identified impact mission as a critical value driver, and then recognized that, I'm a significant philanthropic giver. And so I connected those two things and began to realize that, my real mission here is to catalyze business owners, activate business owners into impact mission. And that by doing that, I'm multiplying my ability to have an impact on humanity as well. So, that's really what it became for me. So along the way, the recommendation for impact mission, while by default is a key value driver that every business should attend to, for me, it became part of my personal mission, which was to really drive that into place. And so I have a simple policy in my company. We'll take on any client through our phase 1 engagement. But if you want us to work with you on either raising money or selling your business, you must implement an impact mission or we will not work with you. And that's how we're doing it. We're going to continue to catalyze businesses into impact orientation by virtue of letting them understand that we're going to get 200 to 400% more for their company than they'd otherwise get, but they're going to have to implement an impact mission in order to get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you find that people, acquiesce to that because you just said, hey, the return is this much bigger, yet that they're not fully sold on it, and that working with you through a process, you actually do activate them and wake them up because, everyone isn't there. Otherwise, they'd come to you for that to begin with.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's a good point. And that's why we use the first phase, right? So during the first phase, they will get activated. By the time we finish the valuation growth assessment, which is an 8 to 12 week phase of the project, 99% of the time, we have transformed the inactive leader into an active impact leader, just by virtue of our interface with them and by helping them understand how this is going to impact their business and why it's a good thing to do, not just for the financial reason, but also for their soul. I mean, we help them connect with what they've always wanted to do. Think about it this way. You wouldn't go into business if you didn't have a deep motivation for going into business. It's just too hard, right? I mean, it's hard to own a business and run a business and make payroll and deal with government regulators and yada, yada. It's hard. And if, you wouldn't do it if there wasn't something bigger than money driving you. You just wouldn't. So what is it? Well, that's the thing that most business owners have lost sight of. They had a glimmer of it when they started. it might have looked like, well, if I can build this business and sell it 2 years for $100 million, I can, give to charity and sit on the beach or, whatever, go play golf and, earn money for, United Way or something, whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was there. It wasn't well defined, but it was there. Then they got busy running a business, and that takes lots of attention and energy and focus. And so it sort of gets pushed aside. I mean, keep in mind, when people, having had this experience with my own evolution as a philanthropist, I didn't even realize I'd become one. When I was 5 years old, I asked my dad, "What's a philanthropist?" I heard it on the radio with, sitting in the car with him. And he said, he'd tell me what it was. And I said, "Wow, that's cool. I want to do that." And he sort of chuckled like, "Okay, that's good, son." Right. And so, years later, I'm just doing my thing. I was always tended to be a giver. And so I gave to causes that I cared about. And along the way, that became a more consistent group. And pretty soon I was really focused on giving significant sums of money to save the Amazon rainforest and ocean research and shark research and, other causes that just resonated with me. And I never even noticed that over that duration of time, I was actually giving very significant sums of money to these causes and had a very philanthropic, active philanthropic presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually went to give a presentation one day, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that, wow, I actually am a philanthropist. Wow, I didn't even know it, right? But my point is that everybody has a reason to give. They want to give back somehow. That's human nature. But we put everything in front of it. So when I tell that story about my philanthropy to people, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, "Hey, I've always wanted to give like that too." The question that I ask is, well, what stops you? Well, I'm waiting to have enough money to do it. And I tell them, well, if you're waiting to have enough money to do it, you'll never do it because you'll never have enough first. That's not how it works. The way the system works, you give first, you receive as a result of giving, and you give more and you receive more, and you give more still and you receive more still. That's the way the system works.
Well, tell me about that. What's the system that you're referring to?
Well, I mean, it could be anything. Like, hey, I tell people, look, do you know that there are places in the world where $5 a month will feed a family for a month? You got $5, feed a family. You got $25, feed 5 families. Start there. Give $25, and it's 20. Then the $25 becomes $250 pretty easy. Then $2,500 even easier. And then the $2,500, lo and behold, somebody gives you extra money. They do more business with you, or you get a tax refund or something else. And then you give $25,000, and then, whoa, look at this. You got like a break on your mortgage. And now it's, everything happens this way. But it starts with you giving, not you waiting to give. There's no enough. There's no, this whole thing about money is really weird. People see money as if like there's this big pile of it, and everybody gets to pull something from the pile, and the pile will somehow get depleted and go away. That's not what money is. Money is an exchange of value. So I start the process of having an impact on the world by having an impact on the world, even if it's a small one.
Mm-hmm.
That generates a return, not an intentional profit, but it generates the flow of money. That's what money is energy flow. I contributed value. I receive value. That's the exchange. Then I multiply that and I contribute more value. I receive more value. Again, I'm not doing a trade here. It's just the energetic flow of money. And so when I combined that understanding with what I do as a profession, I realized that, wow, if I'm taking a business that's worth $50 million and I'm getting it repositioned in the market to be sold for $100 million, that's $50 extra million we can give. We can contribute. We can use to have an impact on the world. We can start a new company. We can start that plastics cleaning company. We can start the well drilling in a place with no water. All these things can be done. And that 50 million will what? Multiply. That's the whole system. So that's what really got me turned on to this whole notion of using my natural activator talent. I activate other people into action. So, I mean, I'm not out there drilling holes. I'm not out there catching sharks, right? I'm activating others to do the things necessary to solve these problems. I recognize, well, I can activate legions of people. I can activate whole companies. Whole companies can activate communities. Communities can activate nations. Nations can activate the world. And that's how I see the problem being solved. I just don't think there's enough charitable giving on the planet to solve the problems that plague humanity, whatever they are. Everybody has their own list, right? And charitable giving is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad we have as much of it as we do. But I believe that what's really necessary is for there to be businesses that develop sustainable solutions to the problems that we're dealing with. And that's the only way we're going to solve it. And the only way to do that is to help business owners understand you have to move in the direction of contributing an impact on this circumstance. I'm starting to preach now. Sorry.
No, this is gold. Steve, do you consider yourself an impact investor?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't invest in a company that doesn't have this. I mean, I won't work with a company that doesn't have this. Why would I give them money?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's interesting because I don't see that phrase in a lot of your work, but that is exactly what you are. So I'm just curious.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to get that straight over to the copywriter.
Yes.
Okay. See, once again, I don't write my copy. I activate someone else to write my copy.
I'll pass on some thoughts. So many things you just said were really unpackable. But one thing I'm thinking of is you were 15. I keep going back to this. Young. You were really young, and you learned these lessons about activating value. What is value? And at such a young age, you said that people start businesses for a reason. It's hard. Why else would you do it? What was your reason when you were a kid? Would it be the same reason now?
No. So this is going to be another sort of layer. I hope I don't take too. I don't know if
It's all about the layers. Bring them on.
But okay, so there's a layer of spirituality over this, right? And so I also have come to believe and understand that we live into a projection of our subconscious mind, that our beliefs are formed. It's not that, here's what happens. Something happens in your life when you're young. You make a decision that it means something about you, and you live your entire life as if that decision were true. But it wasn't true. It was just a decision you made. And so these are the things that cause people to constrain themselves and to limit their belief about what's possible for them. These are the things that cause people to become workaholics, because deep down, unconscious to them, is this belief that they're not worthy of the success they want. So they see it as, in order to have the success I want, I have to sacrifice every other aspect of my life. I have to sacrifice my relationship with my partner, my wife, my kids. I have to go on long trips, and so that's the life that they live into, because that's the life they believe. I've always said to people, if you want to know what someone believes subconsciously, look at their life, because their life is a projection of their beliefs. And so, in this case, my beliefs were formed in such a way based on my experience of growing up in my family. I made these decisions, and these became subconscious programs that I then lived into. And so for me, that's what it resulted in, is I didn't have any other aspiration other than, hey, this is available to me. I'm going to do it anyway. I might as well make money doing it. I didn't have a big mission at the time. Later in life, as I began to sort of encounter what was really going on and why people behave the way they do, why I behaved the way I did, why things upset me and other things didn't upset me, and what were the things that triggered me into an upset, and how do you alleviate that so I don't get triggered like that again? And I started to really read and research and understand, and that's been a lifelong journey. for me, and really accelerated, many, many years later when I became 50, or 45 maybe. But I think it's an important part of this. There's a layer of this that says, look, everything is energy. There's no difference between you and I. There's the projection of the difference that we're living into. There's the contribution we're each making individually, given our role, our position, our responsibilities in the world, right? And everything happens for a reason. So I see it all as a beautifully orchestrated energy field, not, like an army of people that are motivated or mobilized in a particular direction. And so by helping the business owners I work with get in touch with this deep-seated child, basically, within them, they're able to get clear about why they're here, what they really want to accomplish. I mean, how many times have you heard in your life a 65, a 70, or an 80-year-old, not necessarily on their deathbed, but some, expressing a regret for never having done something they really wanted to do? That's related to this. That's related to them. They created a framework of beliefs that constrained them and never let them go out and do that thing, when whatever they were limiting themselves was not true at all. It was just a decision they made when they were a 5-year-old.
But when did you really get that? When did you, even though you were living that to a large extent, when did you get it?
Yeah, no, I got it so I could articulate it when I was in my 40s, but I made sure I gave it to my daughters when they're in their 20s, right? So,
did they
right?
get it?
Oh yeah, big time, yeah. So they're two of the clearest, most enlightened people I know, without a doubt.
What was for you? Was there a moment, an experience, something when you had that moment of awakening?
Yeah. Definitely. So my pathway took me through that journey in the Bay Area, and I was really focused on supporting that network of investors that I was working with there. And sort of by nature of that industry, and frankly, the nature of that location of that industry, it became very firm-like. You ever see the movie The Firm?
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
It became, sort of like you're not really living your own life. You're really, being dictated into a lifestyle, and sort of the carrot in the club. I mean, because you'd make a lot of money, so you were very comfortable, but you never got to enjoy the comfort because you had to work all the time, right? So anyway, but it was sort of that experience, and what happened is I finally just got to a point that said, no, this is not consistent with who I am. This is not the path I'm supposed to be on. I was literally, and I'm not exaggerating, I was sobbing on the way to work every day. I hated what I did so much. It was so miserable that I couldn't stand it. So I just made a decision. I remember I took a flight from San Francisco to Japan for a meeting with a large conglomerate there. And I was really struggling with this decision. And I remember buying a spiral-bound notebook in the airport in San Francisco, and that was the notebook I was going to use to journal my way through this complex labyrinth and come up with the answer of what I'm going to do with my future. Went on that flight, long flight, as you know. We were arriving in Tokyo. I looked at the notebook. It was completely blank. Right? I sat there and sort of stared off into space the entire time, and I never wrote a damn word on the notebook. But I did this. I was inspired in that moment. Literally, a bolt of lightning kind of inspiration hit me. I flipped the book over onto the backside. I wrote in big letters, "Just quit." And what's interesting about that is what it took. Because as long as I had, it was sort of the 1 foot on the boat, 1 foot on the dock moment, right? It was like, this is your choice. You choose one way or the other, or you end up in the drink.
How old were you then?
I was about 45, maybe 42. I'm pretty bad with ages and dates, but somewhere in there. And so it was, I was letting go of what I thought was all the things I was supposed to be, right? I was supposed to be this gunslinging expert, this secret weapon. And I had a whole persona around who this was, right? And it was like, a friend of mine, Stephen Feinberg, the guy that I was working with all these years, he's the one that sort of diagnosed it. He said, Steve, it's sort of like this. Every morning you get up and you zip up a new skin and you work all day in that skin. And then you come home and out and you unzip the skin and you come out and it's really you. But it's not really you all day. And that's what it felt like. I felt like, wow, that's exactly my experience of my life. I'm not behaving. I'm not being the person I really want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so locked in by my subconscious beliefs on what was necessary to live the life I wanted to live. And, it's like I'd be able to do these other things in the future, right? Like that. I was so locked into that, I could not see that is the very thing that was keeping me from accomplishing it.
I have a question. So were you at that point, even though you were in that skin, and I think so many people will resonate with what you just said.
Yeah.
Were you a philanthropist? Did you have any parts of yourself still intact or developing?
Yeah, developing for sure. So I was doing some giving, right? It wasn't quite as substantial as later when I became more enlightened about what that really meant. But I have always been sort of a giver. So, it's sometimes to my own peril, but it wasn't really motivated by anything. It was more like, yeah, you got to give, right? You got to give. Like you got to tithe.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're going to be part of a church, you tithe. If you don't want to tithe, then don't be part of the church. I mean, right? It's like that. So it's sort of like an ante to be in this role, but I didn't really have the deep connection that I have with it now, right? Anyway, so that was a turning point, and I just said in that moment that the only way I can get out is to cut the tie. I have to cut the grip I have on the branch. I have to let go. I have to cut it, and that's what I did. It shocked everybody, and cost me a lot of money, and everybody sued everybody, and it was sort of ugly for a while, but boy, was it the right thing to do, right? Because then what it did is allowed me to take these talents, my skills, my passions, my interests, and really use them the way that I am meant to use them, right? And then once I had the connection, I call it a connection with divinity, now I get sort of daily downloads on what I'm supposed to get done today. This is what I want you to work on today. Move this ahead. Stop working on that. Do that. Whatever it is. And boy, it's just a great way to go. I mean, it's because every day is a win.
Yes. So. But what was the transition for? Like, what was it like for you when you left, you quit, you stepped in?
Very difficult. Very difficult.
Then all of a sudden you have what you have now. No, like you built something massive.
I wish it were that easy. Yeah. No, it took me about 12 years to make the transition. I mean, it was a very difficult transition. I tried a lot of things and failed, right? So, by no means has this been a cakewalk,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the things I did that succeeded, but then it was sort of like, yeah, but this isn't it either. I mean, okay, I got this off the ground and it looked good, but yeah, it's not really hitting the mark either. It's more like a yellow, not a bullseye, right? Mm-hmm. So now I gotta, sell it off or wind it down and go on to the next thing. And, then I started to get in my stride as this whole methodology developed at Zero Limits Ventures. And the thing that really saved me was talking to small and medium-sized business owners, and I would interview. They'd want some consulting, and so in order for me to provide them consulting, I needed to understand what they were doing, and so I would ask them a bunch of questions, and I started to notice a couple of really interesting things. Like almost none of them had a well-defined exit strategy, and the excuse was always that, well, I'm not ready to sell. To which I guess I've shared with you that I stopped and I'd say, well, okay, but the exit strategy is not about the exit. Where'd you get that idea? Mm-hmm. The exit strategy is about the strategy. I mean, how do you know what to do? They're like, what? Well, how do you know if you don't know what's driving the value of your business? what's driving the value of your business? And 90% of them would say, what do you mean, like revenue and earnings? No, that doesn't drive value. That is used in a calculation of something called valuation, but valuation doesn't equal transaction value. Their jaws would drop. Like, what? That's not what I know. Well, of course not, but that's incorrect. Transaction value is something wholly different. Valuation is a calculation of numbers that is representative. It gives you a relative representative basis of the value of your business, but that's not what the business is actually worth, because the only way you can know what the business is worth is by virtue of who it's worth something to, the buyer. So if you don't know who the potential buyer is and you don't know what's valuable about your business, you don't know what to invest your time and money in, how do you make any decisions, right? So that's what we do. I don't want to get off into a pitch, but so the point is that I started to see this and I recognized that this is an entry point. This is an opportunity for me to use my skills to help these businesses improve their resilience, their recovery capacity, their predictability, reduce risk, increase value, make it a better business, and create a legacy out of the endeavor at the end. And that's what we do. So I recognize that these things culminated in this, this long journey of like my first business, learning that lesson, building a bunch of software companies, learning God knows how many lessons during that process, going out to the Bay Area, working with a bunch of VCs and exiting a bunch of companies there, learning a whole lot more, getting to this epiphanic event in my life where, I broke down and said, I got to quit, and didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go, didn't know what was going to happen, didn't have any relationships, didn't have any friends. And, it was like all that. And then to seed this new endeavor aligned with my reason for being here has been extraordinarily rewarding. And to do it in a context where I'm constantly able to have an impact and give and see the fruits of that multiply and so on. It's just very rewarding. And I'm glad to have, I'm predicting another 40 years doing it. So.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because I'm curious what is next for you. What actually feels like a challenge for you?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, because you're right. You've caught me right in the midst of a transition that was inspired about 15 months ago. Understand that, I built a little firm. We could handle 3 to 5 transactions a year. That produces, about $20 million a year. It's not bad money. No expenses, no overhead. Yeah, pretty comfortable. I could sit on my porch and, take phone calls. That seemed pretty sweet. And, so I sort of had that moment on my porch with a glass of wine one night. I've arrived, I'm finally there. That's all I needed to say. The universe responded with a 2x4 to the back of my head and said, no, you're not. You're not even close. You're just getting started. Now you need to take what you've done and multiply it. You need to catalyze and activate it, drive this into place. You get enough people like you out there, this whole thing tips and everything falls into place. So get busy. It wasn't exactly those words, but it was close to those words. At least those were the inspirations that were coming. And so I remember calling my partner saying, hey, I just got a super big download and it really has me worried. And she said, well, why? I said, because it says I got to play a lot bigger. And I was really getting comfortable here. And she laughed and said, well, it's time to go play big. Let's go. And so that's what we've been doing. And so now the transition is really, okay, how do we scale and multiply this message and this capability? How do we get a whole team of people how can we move 20 companies a year or 50 companies a year, right? Or whatever the numbers are, right? How do we activate more to really accelerate the impact we can have on humanity and the planet or whatever? And that's what I'm in the midst of. So we're producing digital webinar programs, we're producing training, we're producing all kinds of books and guides and stuff, right? So that we can get more people on board with understanding all of these principles that I've shared and more, of course. But.
We'll have links to all your work in the show notes so people can find you and know what you're doing. But where would you, if someone wanted, what's the starting point for,
Yeah.
okay,
So it's going to change, but today they should just go to zerolimits.com/apply, APPLY, and that'll route you to the best entry point for any information about us. There'll be some videos there. There's a link to a webinar there. There's an opportunity to schedule an appointment with me there. So yes, everything's there.
That's great. That's awesome. So one of the things that stands out to me the most is that is your consciousness journey. It's like all that you've created and done, and this, this epic piece of the consciousness journey that is really the dot connector, right? So when you're working with people who are amazing, brilliant business minds and really, really good people, care about impact, care about business, but just maybe not there on that consciousness spectrum or journey, it's like just can't connect the dots like you can. For example, when you talk about risk, the more conscious you are, risk is a worldview thing too. You have your
absolutely, no question.
So how do you drill that in, right? You have your technical risk factors that everyone knows about, but then there's also other risk that you don't get unless you can really connect more dots. So what is that? How does that play out? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's two things there, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So there's two elements at play. There's who I'm being as a person and the influence that has on the person, the leader I'm working with, so the business owner. And so it's important for me to be impeccable with my word and so forth, right? And then if I do that, if I give them that path, that becomes a desirable destination for them. So they'll inquire about how do you deal with this? I mean, how do you manage this? How does this happen? I mean, how do you manifest things like this, right? And so forth. And so it's an opportunity just to answer a query and educate and share principles, methodologies, techniques that they may never have tried. I mean, for instance, when I take an executive through a rudimentary procedure like the science of getting rich the first time, the very first path, they're like, what? This is sort of crazy. But yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but look, it worked for me. You asked me, so this is how, so do it. And then when they come back to me after that 2-week period and say, holy crap, I can't believe how much things have changed. I mean, that was amazing. How come no one ever teaches this? I say, well, it's not that no one ever teaches it. How come you never asked? Okay, right? Because that's really the thing. You weren't in a place where you could hear it before. So you asked at the perfect time, and now you got it at the perfect time, and that's the way the world works, right? So there's techniques like that I can introduce people to informally. I mean, I'm not like pounding on people, right? The other thing is, frankly, it's within me. So I went and studied with Dr. Hugh Len in Hawaii, who at the time was sort of a renowned leader of the Ho'oponopono presence, I guess. There are others, but he was certainly one of the big influencers there. And I learned that's a Hawaiian healing technique for really focusing on clearing and cleaning yourself so that it impacts the external world that you see and experience. It's a little complicated, but that's it in a nutshell. So it really comes down to, well, how am I staying in practice, right? So for every client, I keep a journal. And that journal is not about the client. It's not about their behavior. It's not about, their mission or anything. It's really about what's happening within me that I need to deal with in order to support the client. So what things are coming up for me that are keeping me from being as effective, as influential, as loving, as caring, as, effective, whatever I used that twice, whatever, on behalf of the client, right?
I love that.
And so it ends up really clearing the path. And what's interesting and fascinating to me is that person experiences a shift, even though I'm cleaning me, right? So, I mean, I have a great story on this, but I know we've run very, very long, so I don't know.
It's up to you. Well, what you just said reminds me of the system you talked about, the money system, right? Giving, the flow, and it's
right? The flow. It's energy. Everything is energy, so it's a flow. It's not like there's anything out there. it's all one thing. You know?
Can you tell the story, please?
Okay. So, all right. So we had a client, good business, right? Uh, Needed a lot of work, but that's what we do. But the individual was very unenlightened, right? It was almost anti-enlightened, if you get the idea,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Right. And this was before I'd come up with this rule that we didn't work with clients like this. So I was, we were struggling because he was a very difficult person to work with. And he would, in our business, where this stuff really jumps out is like within a few months before the end of a transaction. The seller will become increasingly irrational. And if you don't do something to help replant rationality, they will sabotage the deal. They'll kill it somehow. And they won't even mean to. It'll be subconscious, but they'll do it, right? So for years, we would work with methods that my friend Steven would give us, and we'd take them through all kinds of exercises to, help them deal with their emotions and so on, sort of the surface level psychobabble stuff. But then I began to realize that, oh, wait, there's another way to do this. If we can move them into alignment with their purpose by orienting them towards the impact mission, then this whole thing about the transaction will completely disappear. It'll just be something that happens along the way to, feeding the hungry or whatever the person's mission is, right? So, and that works, right? So that was very powerful. That was a great way to help sort of influence the behavior of the person and shift the outcome so that, they didn't torpedo the deal right at the last minute, which, as anybody in our business knows, is the worst disaster of all, right? So anyway, so this particular client, literally had torpedoed 4 transactions in very creative ways. And, everyone around me, all my advisors, all my team members, everybody was saying, fire the client, man. The client's no good. Get out now, minimize your losses. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep working on this. And, so I really amped up the clearing. I mean, it was like a 500-page journal, right, that I ended up with on this thing, right? It's like I just amped it up, did a lot of Ho'oponopono, did a lot of clearing, did a lot of focusing, did a lot of prayer, did a lot of mantras, did a lot of meditation, just kept amping it up, right? And ultimately, we had a very successful transaction, 700% value gain, huge win, right? It was great. He was, thankful, but not effusive. But that was his personality, right?
Still anti-enlightened, or did he get enlightened?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? So then I went on to the next thing. I mean, I put his journal in the rack with the rest of them and moved on to the next one, right? So I'm at an event in Cartagena, and he's there, and I'm swimming in the pool, and he swims up to me. He goes, "Hey, I hear there's some sort of journal about me." I said, well, no, there's not a journal about you. There's a journal that I kept while I was working with you. He said, well, can I look at it? I said, well, sure, you can look at it, but it's not going to mean anything to you. I mean, there's a lot of gribbles and scribbles and, poems and prayers. And yeah, but if you want to look at it, sure. I'm not going to give you a copy of it. It's mine, right? He goes, oh, no, I thought it was more like a document. I said, no, it's nothing like that. This is just like what I was dealing with while I was working with you. And so he said, well, I wanted to tell you about something. I've gotten involved in a new project. For some reason, I took some of the money that I earned out of that transaction. I went over to Africa. I was on a safari in Africa, and I met someone who introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone. Pretty soon, I was in an impoverished village in Africa, and I realized I can help these people. I can have an impact on these people's lives. I can secure their financial future with them, not for them, with them. I can show them how to do this, right? He became ignited by that experience. And now he invests enormous sums of time and money, resources into establishing successful enterprises in impoverished indigenous cultures in Northern Africa.
Wow.
He became so successful at that. He called me about 18 months later and said, Steve, I need to buy a bank. Can you find me a bank? I was like, well, I can try. Right. So I went out. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything that would work for him. But that's an exact case. And what's funny is that people who know us, know me, and know him, they come to me. I'll see them, at some event somewhere, or used to be an event somewhere. They'll come up to me and go, "What did you do to him?" I didn't do anything to him. I did it to me. Right? Because I was the one creating the projection of that person. So that's the biggest picture I can give you today.
That is great. I was going to ask you, so what's one nugget you would want to leave for the listener?
Oh my God.
I think you...
I don't know. There's a bunch of nuggets there. They're not enough.
That was a nugget. No. That was a nugget. So, it's part of the system. Yeah. So one last thing would be, so you talked about money, and the flow of money is the system. You talked about transforming people, transforming yourself to transform other people as part of the system. Is there one more piece in that trilogy?
Well, I think that, so sort of dovetailing on the last two questions and combining them, there is one thing more that I would offer. And that is that this is not something that you engineer. This is something that you allow. And what I mean by that is you have to silence yourself, silence what you think, what you believe. All the contextual frameworks that you're operating off of are just formed out of a set of decisions, most of which you made when you were younger than 10, and that's created this whole framework in which you're living. And in order to really connect with your higher purpose and to really start to feel the energetic flow that we're talking about, and be empowered to use that energetic flow for the accomplishment of your greatest purpose, you have to learn how to silence all of the racket that you're generating through your own subconscious being. And the best and most powerful way I can tell people to do that is to learn how to meditate. Now, you don't have to go all transcendental. I don't do transcendental meditation. I do deep consciousness meditation, though. I get very quiet. I'll use tools like audio binaural beats and so forth to help me get into a mind quieted state. But it's a practice. So it's a daily practice, and they call it a practice because you never perfect it. So it's okay to not be perfect every day. So it's a practice, and you do the practice, and you literally will begin to receive the inspiration, the instruction. I've referred to it several times as a download. Mm-hmm. This is what you should focus on. This is the idea. This is the secret link, right? And it happens to me every single time. So here's how I do it. I'll model it for people. They can take what they want out of it. So I sit down, get my quiet, have my coffee or my tea, and I get quiet. If I'm going to use my audios, I put my little headphones on, and I'm ready, right? So I got it in my place. And I start with a very simple mantra. I say, so I'm speaking to divinity. I say, that I know I can't do this without you. Teach me, show me, reveal to me what I should do. Then I go into my meditation. I just quiet my mind. I just, get quiet and be there, present with myself. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. I mean, when it's done, it's done. You'll know, right? And then what happens is when I come out the other side of that meditation, I always have something. It's an idea. It's a flash of inspiration. It's a person's identity that so call this person or go this place or, do this thing. And what I've found is that when I follow that, when I do or pursue or execute on what I received, things just flow. When I second guess that, like one time I got, go to the mall. Like, I don't have time to go to the mall. I got work to do. Right? So, right? But here's the thing. Had I not gone, I would not have been in a position to have the impact I had on a particular transaction I was working on. Because I went to the mall, I trusted and said, okay, well, I'll go. The only parking is holiday season. The only parking spot was near a Starbucks. So I parked in the parking spot. It was a 20-minute spot. So I went into the Starbucks. Starbucks is completely packed on the holidays, right? Get my Starbucks. There's only one stool in the place. I sit on that stool, and wouldn't you know, exactly the guy that I need to talk to is sitting in the next stool. Right? And he speaks first. Right? I mean, it couldn't have been better, right? I didn't have to do anything. I just had to show up. Right? So, right. And those things happen. I know it sounds crazy. People are probably going to go, this guy's lost his mind.
No.
But
This sounds normal.
It works that way. That's the system. So, it's really about establishing that meditative connection. And all these other things that we just talked about, that all happens through inspiration. You don't actually have to work on any of that stuff. That's the easy stuff. Right?
Wow. That is beautiful. I love how that you spent this time with me and us today, because how beautiful the labyrinth that we just walked was just amazing. I mean, we, no plan here, but we got through this beautiful windy journey, and I'm so glad that I got to know you better and that people got to meet or know you. Really looking forward to seeing your next evolution.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And, I appreciate your time and the energy you're giving this. It's a beautiful thing. And I appreciate you helping me get my word out. So very good.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. You'll find those links at catalysttalks.com. Join us. We continue this conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out to me privately, you can send me a message at stephanietrager.com. Your attention here means the world to me. Thank you.